Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Yash, like great to have you here. So, basically, the idea is to like we have a lot of people interested in product management, either students or looking to switch to product roles or in early product roles. So the idea is to like take them through a sample mock interview question. I mean, a product management interview question,
Right.
and like walk through the the answer and the thought process and like what the interviewers generally evaluate uh, the question on. And yeah, that's the idea. Maybe like you can start with a little bit of introduction about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So my name's Yash. I graduated from IIT Kharagpur in 2013 as an engineer. But ever since then, I've been working for startups mostly. I started off with mainly marketing roles where I was heading the marketing for a couple of startups. And post that, I've done my MBA from Indian School of Business, Hyderabad. Uh, and since then, I've been working as a product manager at a couple of startups. I currently work for a startup called Playshifu. We are basically AR gaming startup. We are one of the only AR gaming startups in the country, and we make educational games for kids. So currently, I work as a product manager for a line of products called Flugo, which is like ever since I've started working on it, we've made around 15 to 20 games for kids around the country. And I also work as a data PM for the same organization. As I said, I work for as a PM for a product, and I work as a data PM. That, as a very beginning, is a basic like introduction of specifically what product roles are defined as. Multiple startups or organizations have product managers for a particular role. They also have product managers that can only solely focus on data and how data can be used on improving their existing product. So that's about it. According to me, a product manager interview consists of broadly 3-4 rounds. The first round is giving the interviewer an understanding of why you essentially want to move to a product role, or why that is something that you should be trying out. You can come from anywhere, and if you, as long as you have a very logical answer of why product is the next good thing for you, you will do well in this round. The second round is essentially how good you are at math, because product manager roles mainly focus around using data to improve your product. The second round is typically a guesstimate of how big a product is. So it can, guesstimates are of different types. So it could be market sizing, it could be understanding how much time or would it be required to do a particular thing. So it's basically a math focused question. The third round is essentially a product thinking question, where the interviewer would tell you how they want to develop a particular product. The problem statement can essentially be very vague. There is no particular direction in which you'll particularly be asked a question. Suppose you're interviewing for the product team at Uber, doesn't mean you'll be asked a product thinking question for taxi services in India. Yeah, it can be a varied. The fourth round is essentially a culture fit round of how well you fit into the culture and why you would be a good addition to the team.
Right, right.
That's roughly it.
So let's take one of those rounds and maybe like walk through it. So product design and like product thinking and design thinking, uh,
Sure.
like on a sample problem statement.
Okay.
Uh, let's try that. Like maybe like I can take a sample. We can take a sample problem statement and
Sure.
we could.
I think somebody has a question. Yeah. So
Uh,
if you guys don't mind, can we
yeah,
take questions at the end?
sure. Let's do that, guys. You could put your questions in chat, and we'll take them at the end. Let's meanwhile, let's like walk through this sample question and like the answer, and Yash will give like reasons
Sure.
about what his thinking on the answer, and like then we can address those questions.
Right.
Great. So so a sample question could be like like design a product that would improve the bowling performance of a cricket team. So
Okay. Sure.
uh, yeah,
Yeah. So typically, the main issue about the product thinking round is you can be asked anything. So it can typically be a question like you said,
right,
design a product for a cricket team. You might not completely have knowledge about the product.
right,
So if you don't know about the product per se, at the very beginning of the interview, this is something that you can call out clearly to the interviewer. There's nothing wrong in not knowing about a product.
right.
You might not be a cricket fan and you can say, this is something I don't know about. So I might not be a good product manager.
So you'll get a
So
different question.
you sometimes get a different question. Sometimes they do take that into consideration because it is not essentially knowing, like if you're working on a product over time, you generally do gain expertise over time.
Right,
But a lot of product management initially is about how you use intuition to build out a product.
right,
So it is completely not about the knowledge. And specifically, questions like this are typically designed around how the person breaks down the problem and
right,
how he tends to solve them as a product manager.
right,
So when I'm talking about this problem in specific, the first part of the interview would be breaking down and understanding the problem. So as a product manager, you have to scope out the problem. So if you would ask me, improve the performance of a bowling team,
right.
my first question would be, what do you mean by improvement? So yeah, Jaren, what do you think? What do you mean by improvement in this case? Am I working for a big client? Am I working for a small client? Is this for the national team, international team?
Let's take it as the national team,
Sure.
and
Uh,
by improvement we could like what do you have in mind by improvement? Like it could be let's say
yeah. So typically, an interviewer would reply to a question with a question, and specifically in your case, as you said, what do you think improvement would be? In my case, I have multiple things in mind when I talk about improvement. It could generally be fitness level improvements where a person could be playing in the test match and he needs to bowl a lot more overs than he's currently delivering at. It could specifically be taking more wickets, or it could be giving away little, like fewer runs. Because
right,
if you understand cricket properly, you understand that like taking wickets and giving away less runs is totally different thing and requires completely different training.
right.
So
So like you defined these three things that could possibly be improved.
if I would be asked uh, like what I think need to be improved, I would give these three specific answers, and my specific recommendation would be to concentrate or focus on wickets.
Like,
Why I say this is because you might give out three recommendations to an interviewer, but you are always supposed to have a focus in mind.
right,
And I would say that I would like to focus on improving the wicket taking ability of my bowlers, because that is what wins matches. It's not the runs that you sort of specifically need to limit your or curtail your bowlers to, but overall getting wickets.
sure. You could consider that as a metric we want to improve, and like
So
you can go ahead.
right. So surely, so this would conclude the first part of the interview where I scope out the problem. Always remember at the end of the first part of the interview, you write down the exact problem statement in words. So we might have started off with, "Hey, let's improve the bowling performance of our bowlers for the Indian team." But what we ended up with is, how do you improve the wicket taking ability of a bowler in the Indian team, right?
Right,
And specifically here, again, I would go back and say, okay, is this a particular series that you want, or is this like a specific uh, kind of format do you want our like uh, performance to be improved in? And here, let's stick to our current problem where we have the problem statement in mind is improve the bowling wicket taking ability of our Indian players. The
Right.
next thing I would do is build out personas. So if you're sitting in a product interview and you're asked this question, step back, ask for 2 minutes, take some time. So your initial questions should also be asked after you've like given yourself a bit of time, say a minute or so. But don't hesitate when you're in this phase of the interview where the next step you have to do is build out personas. Take as much as time as possible because this is the ideation phase. If you come across as somebody who's very structured and intuitive and innovative, so it'll just work out well for you because everybody either is good at innovative thinking or structured thinking, or coming up with their own intuition based ideas. And that is what you have to focus on. Step back, think, okay, I could think about fast bowlers, this is the problem. I could think about slow bowlers, spinners, medium pacers, and scope out the problem. So the next thing that we'll do in this case is build out a persona. Now, I would typically take a couple of minutes and sorry, and build out personas. But I do have a couple of them with me. So the first thing I would try to talk about is say fast bowlers. So fast bowlers are typically the frontline bowlers, and they require to take wickets. So what I'm currently talking about is a fast bowler who needs to take a lot of wickets. He needs fitness. He needs a particular line and length. The second persona would be maybe spinners that need to use surprise as an element. They also need line and length particularly, and they need a change in their pace. The third kind of persona would be medium pacers, and then I could drill that down for the interviewer as well. So when I'm talking to the interviewer, I would build out personas and tell him specifically about this is the particular issue. So right now I would say, mm, I would focus on fast bowlers first, because fast bowlers, according as I said earlier, as the frontline bowlers, if they take wickets, there is a more like greater chance of you winning the series. And across all other personas, also there is something that came up that line and length is certain important thing that comes up.
Right.
So after I'm done with building out personas for my interviewer, I tell them that okay, so fast bowlers is something I want to focus on, and I want to build a product for them,
Right.
right? The next thing you do is in a product thinking interview, give them a specific framework or sort of a product timeline or product roadmap specifically of what you want to build out to solve this problem.
Okay.
So specifically in this case, I would say I will build out an app that will track the line and length, the fitness, the posture, the stance of throwing the ball, the point of delivery. I would build out an app specifically for that, and I would then focus on saying that okay, these are the 5 good things that would help a fast bowler improve their performance. But I think line and length is typically something that I would like to focus on. As soon as you change, the biggest problem for an international or a national team is you have to bowl to a particular line and length to a certain pitch, and consistency improves performance. So I would say, okay, then I will focus on line and length first, and I will build out an app that tracks this thing. Here is the next bit of intuition that will come in. You could say, I will give them a product that is essentially a ball that has all these tracking mechanisms in place. Or I could build out a pitch for them. I could build out cameras that are placed wicket to wicket for them. I could build out cameras or drones that are placed on top of the player when he's bowling. So there are multiple number of ideas that can come up here. But essentially, you have to remember is you have to drill down and focus on one particular problem and then give them an idea of, okay, this is the product I'm talking about. As soon as you're done with this third step of building out an MVP for them, you have to typically talk about how will you build out the product.
Like, can you, maybe again reiterate like what is the MVP that you like in your case, like what is it that you're
Okay, so
suggesting?
in my case, I would typically say that I want to build out a ball that tracks the trajectory, the point of impact, the speed of impact, the speed of like leaving the ball and all that.
Like, is it important that you also mention the other ideas that you had, or
Yes. So in the second step is you focusing on personas and picking one up. The third step is you talking about multiple ideas and focusing on one.
okay, so like why have you chosen that idea? Like, you may have to
You
justify.
have to specifically give them a reason saying this is an idea I personally like. This is an idea that would be easy to build. This is an idea that would be easy to implement. In my particular case, I might just say that, hey, I'll give them a ball because it doesn't change anything for them. It's the same weight, it's the same look and feel. They will not have to change anything in their regime to actually practice with my particular equipment.
Okay,
And there is a certain level of justification that you'll have to give, but it doesn't have to be data backed.
right.
It can purely be a hunch, but it has to be a, like, you should not drop out a very logical idea at this point in time of the interview and pick the one you are currently choosing just because you like it.
And like what about like feasibility versus some ideas could be like very heavy on the tech cost or like the cost of implementation, and
Right. So cost of implementation typically in design thinking is not a limitation.
you need to get as creative as possible, like.
Yes, you need to either get as creative as possible, because in this round of interview they're actually checking what the limit of your imagination or limit of your product thinking or product capability is. If price or money or time essentially was not a criteria,
Okay,
because when you're working as a product manager there is definitely cost that is involved. There is the current time technology that is involved and the bandwidth of your current tech team that is involved. So all these set aside, what can you do as a product manager is the whole idea of this round of interview. The next sort of typically a product thinking round of interview will stop here. They might go into specifically talking about, hey, how do you draw this out, or how do you envision this idea. That is when you if it's a tech product that you've thought of, in my particular case it's a ball, so there will definitely be some sort of a technology involved. So I will have to maybe draw a low fidelity mock-up of how my interface or system would look like that gives out the data to the bowler or something like that.
right.
uh, Alternatively, what happens in a couple of interviews is, okay, now that you're done with the idea, how do you plan to implement this? So you clearly have to understand, as a product manager or as a product manager aspirant, of what the product cycle is. It starts off with design, it goes into development, and then there's deployment and testing and deployment.
Right.
So these three cycles are supposed to be clearly understood by people who are actually interviewing for this roles. This is something that people have to personally read up on, essentially because a fair bit of understanding is good enough. Different organizations work different ways, and you don't need to specifically like follow a particular procedure. Uh, yeah, so that's about it. Typically, good to have also at the end of this round is, hey, since I'm also looking at this being a successful product, I would like to focus or point out a couple of metrics that I would like to track as a product manager for this, that will make this product successful in adoption. So in this case, it would be the number of hours spent by a bowler using our product, the number of times he's come back and used the product, number of referrals, maybe uh, overall improvement in the performance of the user while using our product. So these are some of the metrics that I would highlight at the end of the interview, and that is where I would sign off. So if the interview keeps letting you talk about the current product, then this is how you should logically end it, saying these are the metrics and this is what will define the success or the requirements of improvement for our product.
Right. So how much time does this question usually go on for? Does the answer for this question usually go for?
So a typical interview in this case would go on for around 30 to 40 minutes.
Okay.
Uh, it goes on for longer if the product, like if the person wants to understand what the low fidelity, high fidelity mockups would look like. How would you build out the technology? How would you roadmap this? What do you think are the issues with the product?
Right.
So again, this is something that I missed out in my current this thing. There would also be roadblocks and challenges that you have to identify as a product manager early on when you're designing a current product. So when I talk about metrics, another way of ending it would be possible blockers that you currently have for the product.
In terms of adoption. Yes.
In terms of adoption, or maybe this technology would not be available. Maybe in my case, when I say I want to place a chip or an equipment in the ball, it would hinder the ball stability and people will not like it.
Right.
Something like that. And ending an interview that way gives an insight to the person interviewing you that, okay, she does not like believe that the product will be a hit or be completely perfect in the first go, and there are improvements or focus areas that the product manager will have to look at during the development. Yeah. Right. So that's about it.
So basically you started with trying to scope the problem statement better.
So typically I would say the first part of the interview was a make or break.
Right.
Where if you mess that up, typically when I started giving interviews as a product manager earlier on, I would rush into problem solving because I knew that, okay, this is something I have done. Because what happens in usual cases is people will ask you questions like, what is your favorite app? Okay, hey, let's improve this. And that is something that you've practiced early on. And you want to rush into solving the problem. But that is something that the interviewer is not looking for.
Right.
So here is where luck, or I would say, it's fate that sort of drives a lot of product interviews in this case, or in this round specifically, is because you need not give the right answer. You need to give an answer to the interviewer that he or she particularly likes.
Okay.
Or accepts as a good or commendable answer. So the initial part of the process is something that you have to spend more time on to understand what they particularly need.
Okay.
So yeah, that's about it. You focus on the first bit and you focus on the third bit essentially also, where you try to scope out or detail out the product as much as possible. Now, a lot of product manager interviews are judged based on how you particularly present this data. Now, when I'm particularly talking about, hey, there are 5 parts of this problem or 4 parts of this problem,
right,
what happens is interviewer might have 3 or 4 interviews lined up for that day. And
right,
you need to stand out. And one particular way of standing out is asking for a sheet of paper and putting this out as structured as possible. So what I typically do is, first I divide into 4 halves the paper, and the first half, the second half, the first half is the first part of the problem, the second half is the second half of the problem, and that's the way I go. I write my name on top and I leave it there. This has gotten me through multiple rounds of interviews, and it will help you no matter what, because staying organized and showing yourself as a presentable and structured person helps you in any like round of interview. So yeah, that would be another piece of advice that I would have for people.
So what is the best way to, like you said, the first part is the most important. So should you go into as much detail as possible, as in keep questioning the interviewer for more and more things? Like in this case, you just asked me one thing, like what is the metric that we are trying to improve?
Right. So typically, one, you have to structure out the problem specifically in terms of what is the size or what is the end user that you're focusing on. it could be a market segment, it could be a particular kind of persona. That is something that you have to clarify. The other thing is, are there any blockers for my development? So is there a particular kind of product that you're looking for? Is this a particularly physical, purely physical product that you're looking for? Is this a technology based product? Is this a hybrid of both technology and physical product?
So maybe in this case, like you can ask all these questions. Like in our case, like
right. These are something that you have to definitely ask. The third thing that you have to essentially ask is, okay, what is the metric? What is the metric that you want to improve? Typically, there'll be a problem like, I want to improve sales of this product. So how will I build out, or how will I change my product to build out, how to improve my sales? So you have to understand what sales means, which which segment of the users are you selling to, what is the current monetization strategy. All this is something that you have to completely move into an exploratory mode. When I divide this into, say, 40 minutes of the interview process, the first 4 or 5 minutes are completely spent on defining the problem statement. The next 10-15 minutes are defining the personas. This is time that you spend by yourself on defining personas, like this is the problem that each of the persona has. The third part of the interview is designing the product, coming up with 3-4 ideas, and particularly defining what the good parts are, what the blockers would be, and specifically writing them on paper. You need not specifically make the interviewer or explain it to the interviewer that these are some things that I look at as the blocker. But when you write down 4 ideas, you are supposed to write down their key features and blockers on the paper. You might explore only one of them, but you should write all 4 of them down on the paper. Yeah, I think specifically these are the 4 areas. You've converted this interview successfully if you've nailed these 3. Metrics and blockers are something that are good to have in an interview, and I specifically like people who talk about them in my interviews.
The metrics you want to track, basically.
Right. Metrics that I would like to track as a product manager to define how is the product currently doing.
Okay. So in the example problem that we took, like maybe in the initial part itself, you can ask the interviewer whether it's a physical product or whether it's a digital product that you want. Or
that's something that I definitely should have done in my case, like asking as many questions, because we clearly did not spend 4 or 5 minutes talking about the product. Right. That is specifically something that we should have focused on, and anybody giving this interview should actually. There is a particular way of asking questions,
right?
Because what typically happens is, when you're starting off with asking questions to the product during the product interview, they would be answered with questions, and that is typically something that you don't want. You specifically want a prod in a particular direction. So there is a specific way of asking this question, like, isn't it, or like giving them an example saying, this is something that I plan to do because of this. Isn't this something that you think is possible? Like, so the way of asking questions, this improves over time. This is something that you do not start off focusing on. But as soon as you start working on asking questions, this is something that will develop over time.
Right. So I guess like the first part is more of how much detailed can you be in trying to scope it out.
Right.
And where do you show your innovation or like your creativity in the solution, right?
Innovation particularly happens in 2 particular areas. So innovation, one is understanding the persona problems. So there clearly might be some kind of a persona where I might say, the interviewer can ask this question to like 100 different candidates. And I could clearly say, oh, a left-handed bowler can have a different product than a right-handed bowler. And just putting that in a persona would improve my chances of.
It hasn't heard before from anyone, basically.
Right. That your chance of standing out is essentially what matters here. The second thing is designing the product per se. So innovation there would essentially be critical. But essentially, by the time you are in third round, if you need to be rejected, you clearly have signs,
Right.
and so you need to come out with the most outrageous idea out there if you know that you've messed up till like the third bit of the interview.
Right.
Otherwise, you
Third
clearly
bit,
have signs from
uh,
the interview that you won't be
third bit,
accepted.
you mean like when you reach the solutioning part?
You reach the solutioning part. Typically, interviewers, when they are talking to you for like 30, 40 minutes, there is a clear sign of whether they're interested in your candidature or not. And I mean, it's fairly evident in this round of the interviews, because this is certainly one of the longest rounds. It tires out the interviewer as well as you.
Right.
So this is something that you need to sort of improve on.
Right. So again, so we have a question, like, don't you think a camera-based bowling analysis
Oh yeah,
product?
so you want to start off the questions? Don't you think a camera-based bowling analysis product would surely make more logical?
So one thing you mentioned is like the interviewer liking your answer is also important. So what if the interviewer has a certain bias? So maybe scoping it out even before getting into the solution would help you, right?
So there are two places where you need to ask the interviewer of what their stance is on your opinion.
Okay.
That is the second and the third step. The second step, as soon as you're done with creating the personas, you tell them that this is the persona I want to focus my product around. Do you like this idea, or would you like to focus on any of the other personas? He might as well say, okay, so this is a market that everybody is talking about. Let's focus on another persona. And typically, that answer from the interviewer is based on the fact that he's heard like those problems n number of times during the day, and he wants to look at the problem differently, or wants to look at a different solution.
Right.
So that is one bit. The second bit is when you're specifically talking about that these are the four solutions. So typically, as I said, the smart ball or camera based bowling analysis or something. So typically what happens in this case is why I would choose the smart ball is because I specifically know if there are 10 candidates, then they have talked about the camera based bowling tracker analysis, and you don't want to specifically focus on this. So this is the other thing. You should not also always look at what is the most intuitive thing, but also in this case what the interviewer has not talked about in the
Right.
past.
Right.
So that will also push him to an area where he has not explored. Like if he's heard about the problem 50 times during the day or maybe in the past month, then he always obviously has a better understanding of what the problems are with the current product. If you take him to an area, him or her to an area where he's not explored before, there are obviously fewer cross questions that he'll have, and it would just improve your chances of candidature. Uh, yeah, I think we have another question saying, does a fresher MBA graduate work towards getting a product role? Yeah, this is specific to people per se. If they want to pursue a product role or not, product roles are specifically very interesting if you like product like problem solving. I have worked with product managers who are essentially college dropouts also, and it doesn't affect their way of working or the quality of their work. So having an MBA or not does not essentially matter. You are recommended to get into a product role as soon as you realize that problem solving or uh, you know uh, tech problem solving is your thing to do.
But like, what is a maybe like once somebody graduates from an MBA, like, is there a specific structured approach that someone can take towards getting a product role?
Uh, so product roles specifically work. Uh, so the first thing that I've sort of understood in getting a product management job is you will not crack a product management job applying through portals. Essentially, the highest conversion rate that you will get for a product manager role would be through referrals. So you connect with people working in the existing organization, try to understand why that would sort of be the next big thing for you. Like when I applied for my current role as a product manager here at Playshifu, I specifically wanted to work in the gaming industry. I wanted to work in AR technology, and that is why I applied here. I directly contacted the CEO and I got the reference. And you can start off if you are unluckily. What happens is typically there is a filter of which college you come from, what is the grade that you've scored, what is your understanding of computer science that people have. So maybe startups is probably the best way to get into a product role. You could directly reach out to a CTO or a tech person or a product person in the organization. Reach out to them, tell them why you like the particular field that they're working on, and try to crack those interviews.
Right. Got it.
Mm,
Uh,
I think there was an initial question we should try answer. What can be some of the good impressive answers to why product management? Uh, yeah, why product management? The answer evolves over time. Uh, the first thing that you sort of need to understand is why you yourself want to become a product manager. It's not because it's a high paying job or something like that, because not all product manager roles are high paying enough. You might have like product the perception of product managers is very different in the market compared to what it truly is. Why product management essentially comes from what you've done so far. So it could essentially, if you're a fresher, be an instance of an internship that you've done, or a fest that you worked in, or maybe a competition that you've taken part in that made you inclined towards something. uh, a lot of self-learning helps. So self-learning in the sense, uh, you could have made out a website for yourself. Those are pretty easy to make, and you would say, hey, I was working, I was trying to find a job, I was looking for interviews, and I decided to make a website on my own, and that's how I got into product management. That is completely a logical answer. So those are some of the interesting things that you can do. Maybe building out the website is one of the best and easiest ways of getting into product management. By product management question. uh,
I think we have a question again going back to the problem statement that we took.
right.
Even here, the stakeholders are the bowling coach also, other than the bowler himself. Should we also take like these such things into account?
Yeah. So this is something that you clear out during the process of the interview. There is no particular right or wrong answer during this process.
Right.
Uh, it's just the way you solve the problem. And personally, it is you giving the answer that the interviewer needs. So as I told you earlier, like it's a 40-minute discussion. You know if you're talking to the interviewer and you have given him the answer that he's actually looking for.
Right.
And there is no right answer here, so you can expand it as much as possible. The only thing is, during the first part of scoping out, what people initially start doing is they ask people so many questions so that they have a crystal clear view of the answer, that
Right.
the interviewer is just pissed off. So you need not push your interviewer to that level, but there is a certain level of clarification questions that you definitely need to ask.
Right.
How much tech one should know to get into PM roles? So that question, you specifically need to understand what PM roles are. There is a tech PM role specifically where you want to work for organizations like Microsoft, Google, Amazon, AWS specifically. Then you would definitely require a certain number of like years of experience on tech or products on your own. Uh, but that being said, there are non-tech PM roles also that completely work on ideation, on so let me put it this way. When I'm designing WhatsApp, there'll be a functionality based approach that the user will have, like this is where I want the message to like be shown to the user. This is how I want people to message on groups and stuff. All that non-tech PMs do. What tech PMs do in WhatsApp would be, hey, I want to start the video without it being downloaded completely on the device. So that becomes a buffering, streaming sort of a service that WhatsApp has essentially developed recently. So a tech PM would build out features like that. A non-tech PM would build out features like this goes here, and the interaction or the engagement of the users will go up. So
But in your case, like, I mean, how do you know, like, if it's a tech role, or like how much tech involvement would be there in the role?
typically product JDs are fairly detailed in the amount of tech you need to know. The specific use case in my scenario was I needed to understand how Unity works. Unity is a development platform for games, and
Right.
I needed to know how it works. So essentially, while I was applying for my current role at Playshifu, I had to build out a couple of games myself before I understood how the game specifically worked.
During the hiring process itself.
During the hiring process, I specifically, because it was an inbound request, I took 1.5 months for understanding how the Unity engine works, and built out 4 games myself, showcased the game to them, and that's how my candidature was sort of processed here.
Right.
So
But that need
it's
not be the case.
fairly clear in the JD. Pardon me.
Like, is the process similar to that in all the time, like, or this was just your case
This
where,
is this is something that is a personal experience. Typically, for tech roles, tech is a prerequisite. For non-tech roles, you will never be asked how tech works. If specifically there is a question that is asked is, why do you not know how to code,
okay,
right? And you don't know how to code, how will you deal with it? And specifically good answer in this situation is, everything in my experience so far has not been focused around why I never needed to know anything in tech. I never needed to know how to code to get this far in my career. If it's something that requires me to take a step ahead, or if it's something that is required at work in the future, this is something I'm definitely willing to learn.
right.
So how does making a website answer to the question why product manager? Isn't it more of like a resume? Yeah. So when I was talking about make a website, so essentially the whole idea was, a lot of people who are applying for product roles have not worked on products in the past, and building out a website is not only easy, it gives you a fair bit of understanding of what goes into technology. Acha, there is a front end, there's a back end that I need to change. This is the user experience. And it gives you a fair bit of understanding of what product roles themselves entail. It also makes your case stronger that at least, okay, this is a product is not something that I've worked at my workplace. I have built out a product myself, and that piqued my interest into product management, and that is why I want to get into this full time.
Right. So again, like, we have a couple of questions again back to the MBA question. So there are multiple paths that people take, right? So
Correct.
people, let's say a computer grad in this case, what is the best way to get into product management? Is MBA the right path, or can I directly get into product management? Like,
So if you're a computer grad, then MBA is definitely not a good way of getting into product management. uh, I believe you can directly start applying for product roles. You will get enough number of calls. uh, Depends on what stage of the career you are in. If you haven't worked in any of the product management roles, so in fact, if you have not worked at all, then at this point in time, you will only be able to apply for APM roles, but you have a fair shot at like being able to.
what does an APM typically do? Isn't it like a business analyst or a product analyst kind of role?
APM does entail a lot of like there is a lot of rudimentary work that goes on into in APM's day, I would say. But it also gives you an opportunity of, one, getting enough time to work with other product managers and see how they think. Two, being exposed to what are the best practices in the industry so far. So I think an APM role for a fresher or somebody who directly comes from maybe a computer science background would be great.
So why is this computer science preferred? Like, I mean, is that an advantage? That is because they know how tech works. Is
Yeah,
that
specifically that, because they know how tech works. They would directly try to, they would resonate with the problems that an engineer is currently facing for a tech product, where which other people would not sort of understand.
right? So I mean, it's the same for a non-computer graduate who has like done projects like.
Yeah, definitely. As soon as you show some sort of understanding of tech or development work, you are essentially eligible for any product role.
Right. how does one prepare for product cases? Any resources you would like to
Right. So there are two basic resources that everybody always talks about in product management. One would, I think I'll just get it. Uh, so give me a second. So there's one book that looks like this. It's called Cracking the PM Interview.
Right.
It is essentially a set of questions like the one me and Jaren just solved. They might look very basic in nature when you go through all these cases, but what you sort of take for granted is there is uh, a method to solving these questions that every user has sort of particularly stuck to. There is another book, I don't particularly remember its name, but I think Cracking the PM Interview is something that is enough for, it was particularly good enough for me cracking any PM interview that I've given so far.
Right. I think, yeah, we have one question again, like about the problem statement, the product case. Can
Right.
you tell some success metrics that one can use to judge the success of a feature? Like, is using customer feedback a viable argument, or you should think of other success metrics?
Okay, so when I talk about success metrics as a product manager, you need to understand that there are two kinds of metrics that you always have as a product manager. One would always be a qualitative metric. The other would be a quantitative metric. A quantitative metric is basically something that is quantifiable. A number, you can put a number to it. So when I talk about how much my customers like my product, so there is something called a net promoter score.
Right.
Other quantifiable metrics are engagement scores, number of sessions per DAU, DAU by MAU. These are multiple things that you sort of learn as a product manager over time. But three things that you're supposed to be specifically looking at is acquisition, retention, and repeat.
Right.
And any quantitative metric that you give to an interviewer should fall into these three categories. You need to clearly understand whether it is acquisition, retention, or repeat user. The second part of your question was, would customer feedback be a viable argument? Customer feedback is generally not a viable argument in an interview process, because you are expected to give quantitative metrics and be focused around them instead of like talking, I will talk to 10 customers. That is essentially what I have done a lot of times in the past, where I've called up 10 customers and asked them what is wrong with my product. But that is something that you're not expected to do in an interview. So stay away from that.
Right. Great. I think we have answered all the questions. We have one more question. So, can one switch to a PM role after MS in computer science? I think same answer.
I think, yeah, as far as I know, there are PMs who are 40-year-old and they've just become PM in US. So you can switch to a PM role anytime. That will not be a restriction.
Right.
But typically, somewhere around 5-6 years of work experience is a good time to maybe enter a PM role maximum. That is where I would say cap.
Right.
If you have more than 5-6 years of experience, it has to be a very logical or intuitive way of getting into like a PM role. There you have to have a logic based approach of why.
And is there like a minimum years of experience?
No, there is no minimum years. 0 to 5 years is a good band to get into a PM role.
Right. Is it a good practice to directly use frameworks during interview?
As long as you don't spell it out and it says subtle, so you know you're following a framework, you don't need to point it out to a user. There are frameworks like I think RAC is one of the frameworks that I use for solving problems, where if an interviewer asks me, okay, what did you do in such a situation? So there are multiple frameworks that you have in answering questions. You can use any of them. You don't need to point it out to the interviewer.
What are these frameworks? Like what was the one you just mentioned?
So REC is one I use. REC is basically something like first you describe the situation, then the action that you've taken, and the conclusion. So obviously you need to focus and spend enough time on each one of them.
Right.
But like again, I don't talk about this during the interview.
Right.
Lupus, okay. You need to work X in PM to get a PM. So again, I think Hemanta has asked this question that you need a PM, ex-PM to be a PM. For bigger organizations, maybe yes. For startups, no. You just need to have a very valid reason of why you want to be a PM in that particular organization. You need to convince them enough that you need to do that. This is something that you want to do. I mean, if you're coming directly from sales, then probably that's when typically people do an MBA and move to PM roles because they're particularly looking for a function shift. But then again, that is valid for people with more than 5 years of work ex. So if you worked for 6-7 years and then you want to move from a sales or marketing role to a product role, that's what you would logically do.
Right.
How effective is the circles framework? Circles framework is particularly very good in answering questions, but you don't need to highlight it to the interviewer. As long as you've practiced it enough that it comes very intuitively to you, you should follow whatever framework you like. Sometimes even not following frameworks is fine as long as you're summarizing things properly.
How did you approach like finding the role in startup? Like how do we approach startups for PM roles?
Startups or PM roles, specifically, if you're looking for any good startup role, they're mostly available at angel.co. That is where a lot of people list out their roles.
And referrals, like you did.
And referrals. So referrals is a very good way of getting into bigger organizations. You will not get an interview call if you've not worked as a PM in an organization like Uber or Google. What is the growth perspective in a PM role? I don't completely understand this question, but
So what maybe like what how where do you grow from here? Like maybe that's a question.
okay. So typically, the the way the a PM role progresses is it goes from starts with APM, then PM, then SPM. SPM typically in most organizations has SPM1, SPM2. Then there is a GPM, that is a group product manager. Then there is a principal product manager. Then there is a director. Then there is a VP or director are interchangeable, but it goes all the way up to chief product officer. So,
And I think like in terms of the role, it goes from execution to more of strategy.
right, and particularly depends on other factors also, that how you good at you at office politics and other things also. So,
Right. And any advice for those who want to get into the role of an APM? Is the evaluation process similar for an APM?
so evaluation, this round of interview will definitely be there, the one that we currently practice. What will not be there might be your a deep dive into what you're currently doing. All you need to do is have a very intuitive sort of reason of why you want to get into a PM role, but that's about it.
Right. But these kind of questions would definitely be there, and even the favorite product and how you would improve it. And
Yeah, so one question that you're definitely always supposed to practice is what is your favorite product? And my advice there would be it cannot be Uber, it cannot be Ola, it cannot be Zomato or Swiggy, it cannot be Facebook, it cannot be WhatsApp, because the interviewer has heard it a ton of times. What
right.
I typically like talk to the interviewer about is I specifically have an Android phone and I work with a lot of launcher apps. So I talk about launchers specifically. That is something that the interviewer has never heard about, and we can deep dive, and that is my area of interest. So we specifically talk about that. So that is supposed to be something that you're supposed to have well practiced.
Right.
You're supposed to have given at least 2 to 3 mock interviews on.
But
And
when let's say these questions are not on the spot questions, right? So should it look like you have come prepared for it, or should you think like show that you're thinking something on
No,
the spot?
it's okay.
So,
Being prepared or showing that you're prepared is completely fine in an interview.
right.
I was asked a question saying, will the interviews have coding questions for developer trying to switch to a PM role? You will never be asked a coding question during an interview process. What you can typically be asked is something called pseudo coding. Pseudo coding is writing out logic of what the problem will be solved, like how the problem will be solved.
Right.
Are PMs paid more than software engineers? No.
Depends.
PMs are never paid more than software engineers, but the growth trajectory for a PM is is a lot better. So eventually, hopefully, if you're good
But
at
it's just,
coordinating things, you would get into crack a managerial role that is more than a software engineer.
but it depends on the organization also, right? I mean, like,
I don't know. As far as I've seen, software engineer is always paid more than if a good software engineer is always paid more than a good like PM.
I mean,
So
depends on,
if you did not choose computer science in your undergrad, that is completely your fault, is what the world says.
but again, like, I mean, software engineer, there are like different stages of it, right? Like, I think
Right.
when you're just a fresher software engineer compared to an SD2 at Flipkart or something, I mean, you can't simply say that PMs get less.
So yeah, that is a very blanket statement. I would agree, but the same level of like experience, the same number of years, I believe a developer would get more. But I think that is some like your area of expertise also, Jaren. So I would not know specifically.
Right, right. Okay.
But aren't the PMs who actually handle some of these software engineers? Yeah, you will handle people who are paid more than you. You will handle people who are elder to you all the time. That is something you have to live with.
So I think this is like something that people have a misconception that they are not reporting to you, right?
Yeah. So as a product manager, you have zero people reporting to you.
Yeah,
You have to work with and coordinate with teams. You can't like have anybody reporting to you directly.
right. So I think we'll wrap it up with like one last question. What is the problem solving part in your role? Like in your role specifically? Like,
In my role specifically, there are two cases. One is building out a new product, uh, which hasn't been done in the organization so far. So that goes into the exploratory phase of how this would be done. Essentially, thinking like building out a game. So uh, a game with a completely different AR experience where there is gesture recognition is something I might be working on. So exploring that. The other part of problem solving would be very like intrinsic in nature, where I would have to come up with an idea on why myself to understand that I want to improve the engagement of my app. Now I'll look at the data and I'll say, okay, this is something that needs to be specifically improved, and I will deep dive into finding how that can be improved, building out a feature, and then presenting it to everybody.
right,
What does a PM actually do on a daily basis? PM essentially coordinates with what is currently being built out in the existing products that he has. Uh, the other thing that he does is ideating and detailing out ideas that he wants to build out, he or she. And the third one would be going back and like creating hypothesis and like reiterating or trying to find out with data where what the actual facts are.
right.
Okay,
How easy is it to move from senior product analyst to PM? I think that's a fairly like
that's a logical switch.
great. Thanks a lot, Yash.
Yeah, I think there might be a few more questions that turn up. You can send them to me, or
Yeah, yeah, sure. I'll reach out to you for that.
yeah,
And
sure,
like we'll cover those questions and in the subsequent sessions also.
sure, yeah. So thanks a lot. Yeah,
Okay, guys. Thanks a lot.
bye.
Bye.